Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to a time of powdered wigs, questionable plumbing, and a tax dispute that got wildly out of hand. Daily life in America 250 years ago. Forget the dignified oil paintings of founders in spotless stockings. The truth is, the average colonist smelled like a campfire that lost a fight with a barnyard, and you almost certainly wouldn't last a week. Before we begin, a sincere thank you to the listener who suggested tonight's topic. Your ideas genuinely shape what gets made here, and this channel only grows because of people like you. So take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you, because somehow it's always 2 a.m. somewhere. If you'd rather drift off with just your ears, we're now on Spotify too. The link's in the description. Now dim the lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and tuck your feet in. Let's wonder about a few things first. Could you survive a job with no weekends, no coffee, and no ibuprofen? Would you trust a doctor whose primary medical instrument is a jar of leeches and an unearned sense of confidence? Could you raise 8 children in one drafty room while churning your own butter and dodging a smallpox outbreak? And what would you trade honestly for one hot shower? Just one. Well, you're about to find out. Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1776. You have no toothbrush, a chamber pot that has seen things, and a king across the ocean who's about to ruin everyone's year. Good luck. Let's start where every miserable day begins, waking up. You open your eyes to darkness because windows are small, glass is expensive, and the sun hasn't fully committed yet. You're lying on a rope-strung bed frame topped with a sack of straw or, if your family's doing well, lumpy feathers that smell faintly of the goose they came from. The ropes have sagged overnight, so you're folded into the middle like a taco nobody ordered. The room is cold enough to see your breath. Your 3 siblings are sprawled across you like a litter of puppies, and somewhere below, a cow is making its opinions known. There's no snooze button. There's only the day, and the day has plans for you. Let's examine this bed of yours, because it deserves scrutiny. Those ropes strung across the frame need to be tightened regularly with a wooden key, or they sag until you're sleeping in a fabric hammock of despair. The mattress, what colonists call a tick, is a cloth sack stuffed with straw, corn husks or feathers, and whatever's inside it is compacted overnight into something with the give of a sandbag. Straw pokes through and jabs you. Corn husks crackle and shift with every movement, broadcasting your restlessness to the entire household. And there's no such thing as a fitted sheet, fluffy duvet, or memory foam topper promising 8 hours of restorative bliss. There's a coarse linen sheet, a wool blanket, and the body heat of whoever you're sharing with, which is everyone. Privacy, by the way, is a concept that hasn't arrived yet. The average colonial home is 1 or 2 rooms, and the entire family sleeps in close snoring proximity. Children pile into shared beds or trundle beds rolled out at night. Parents sleep nearby. Guests might be tucked in alongside strangers, because at the tavern or a relative's home, sharing a bed with a complete unknown is simply how lodging works. You will spend much of your life within arm's reach of other people, awake and asleep, and the idea of a quiet room all to yourself would strike a colonist as either luxurious or deeply suspicious. The cold is the other guest in the room, and it never leaves. The fire downstairs has burned to embers overnight, so the upper rooms and lofts where people sleep are frigid. You wake with a cold nose, stiff fingers, and the powerful animal urge to remain horizontal forever. But staying in bed isn't an option, because the fire needs reviving, the animals need tending, and the day's labour is already lining up at the door. So you peel yourself out from under the warm tangle of siblings, plant your bare feet on a cold wooden floor, and immediately regret being conscious. There's a reason people went to bed so early and rose with the sun, And it isn't wholesome discipline. It's that artificial light is precious. The work is endless, and your body, after a day of relentless physical labour, simply shuts down when darkness falls. Sleep in 1776 isn't about comfort or 8 curated hours. It's about recharging just enough to survive another grueling round. You don't wake refreshed. You wake recruited. So congratulations. You're upright, you're freezing, and your spine has already filed a formal complaint. The day hasn't even properly started and you're losing. But before you can do anything else, there's one urgent piece of business that won't wait, and it involves a ceramic pot and a long, undignified walk. Now, nature calls, and in 1776 answering it is a genuine ordeal. Inside, your options are a chamber pot, a humble ceramic vessel kept under the bed and shared by the entire household with a generosity nobody asked for. Emptying it is a chore, and guess whose turn it is? If you prefer the great outdoors, there's the privy, a small wooden shed out back perched over a pit, offering you a splintered seat, a spider community, and a fragrance that announces itself from 30 feet away. There's no soft paper here. People make do with rags, corncobs, leaves, or pages from last year's almanac. You'll never look at a roll of toilet paper the same way again. Let's start indoors, in the dark, because that's where the chamber pot lives. On a cold night, nobody wants to trek outside to the privy, so the pot under the bed becomes the household's nocturnal facility. It's used by everyone, in turn, all night, and it does not have a lid worth mentioning. By morning it is full, it is fragrant, and it must be carried very carefully, down the stairs, and out to be emptied without sloshing. An act of balance and grace that no one teaches you and everyone judges you on. Spill it, and you've made the morning considerably worse for yourself and the floor. This delightful task usually falls to a servant, a child, or whoever lost the unspoken family contest. The privy out back is the daytime venue, and it's exactly as charming as it sounds. It's a wooden booth over a deep pit, sometimes with 2 seats side by side, because apparently companionship was once welcome in places we now consider strictly solo. In summer, the smell is a physical presence that greets you long before you arrive. In winter, the seat is so cold it could remove a layer of skin, and the walk through snow in the dark is a small expedition. Flies treat the privy as a year-round festival, and when the pit fills up, someone has to deal with that too, a job so unpleasant it had its own profession. Then there's the matter of cleaning up afterward, and I urge you to brace yourself. Toilet paper does not exist. What you'll be using depends on your resourcefulness and the season. A handful of leaves, a rag you'll rinse and reuse, smooth pebbles, moss, or the famously available corn cob, which colonial farms produced in great supply. Old paper was precious, but a worn-out page from a discarded almanac or pamphlet sometimes made the rounds, which lends a whole new meaning to recycling the news. Comfort was not a feature. Function, barely, was the goal. All of this waste has to go somewhere, and in towns that somewhere is often a problem. Privy pits leach into the ground near wells. Chamber pots sometimes get emptied with more enthusiasm than aim. Streets in growing towns can carry runoff that you'd very much prefer not to identify. The deep, unglamorous link between sanitation and sickness isn't yet understood, so people unknowingly contaminate the very water they'll later drink, then blame their illness on bad air or bad luck. So you've completed the morning's first and most pressing mission. Armed with a corncob and your dignity in tatters, you've survived the pot, the pit, and the spiders, and the reward for all that effort? Breakfast. I wish I had better news about breakfast. It's time for breakfast, and I want you to lower your expectations into the cellar. There are no eggs Benedict, no sizzling bacon, and absolutely no coffee gurgling helpfully in the corner. What you get is mush. Cornmeal boiled in water until it surrenders, sometimes with a splash of milk if the cow is feeling charitable. Alongside it, a chunk of dense bread and maybe leftover stew from a pot that's been quietly evolving for several days. To drink, cider, even at sunrise, even for the children. Breakfast in colonial America isn't a meal you enjoy, it's a transaction you complete so your body will keep cooperating until lunch, which, spoiler, is also mush. Let's talk about the mush, because it's the cornerstone of your culinary existence. Cornmeal is plentiful, cheap, and endlessly adaptable, which is a polite way of saying you'll be eating it constantly and in mildly varying forms. Boiled thick, it's called hasty pudding, though there's nothing hasty about standing over a fire stirring a pot until your arm goes numb. Poured thin onto a hot surface, it becomes a Johnny cake, a flat griddle bread that at least offers the dignity of a crispy edge. Topped with a drizzle of molasses or a pat of butter, it ascends to something you might genuinely look forward to. Topped with nothing, which is most days, it is a warm bowl of beige obligation. Bread is the other constant, and colonial bread is a workout for your jaw. Wheat flour exists but isn't always affordable for ordinary families, so loaves are often made from corn, rye, or a mixture sometimes called rye and Injun. The result is dense, hearty, and a little gritty, the sort of bread that fills you up and reminds you, with every bite, that it was made by hand from grain that someone in your family probably grew. There's no fluffy store-bought softness here. You don't so much chew this bread as negotiate with it. Now, about that drink, because it raises eyebrows today. Yes, everyone is drinking cider with breakfast, including the children, and no, this isn't a colonial party. Plain water is regarded with suspicion, often for good reason, since wells and streams can carry illness. Cider and small beer, both lightly fermented, are considered safer and more wholesome, and they're consumed throughout the day at every meal. Tea, which had been a beloved breakfast staple, has become politically radioactive after the famous fuss in Boston Harbor, so patriotic households shun it. Coffee's around, but costs a small fortune, so you raise your morning mug of cider, and you start your day with a faint civic-minded buzz. Notice what's missing from this table. There's no refrigeration, so fresh foods are seasonal and fleeting. There's no quick grab and go, because everything is made from scratch over a fire that took effort to build. Meat at breakfast is a treat, usually salted pork if you're fortunate, because fresh meat spoils fast and gets stretched across many meals. Sugar is expensive, citrus is exotic, and the notion of a colourful, varied morning spread is simply not part of life for most families. So you finish your bowl of beige, you wash it down with mildly alcoholic apples, and you brace yourself for the day. Breakfast in 1776 doesn't excite you, comfort you, or photograph well. It just quietly does its job, which is more than you can say for what comes next, because now you have to get dressed, and that somehow is a project. Let's get you dressed and clear your morning, because this takes a while. Underneath everything goes the shift or shirt, a long linen garment you basically live in and rarely take off. Then come the layers, wool stockings held up with garters, breeches or petticoats, a waistcoat, stays if you're a woman, all fastened with an alarming number of pins, laces and faith. There are no zippers, no elastic, and certainly no pockets sewn into anything, so you tie a separate pouch around your waist like a fanny pack with delusions of dignity. Getting dressed is a full production, which is convenient, because you'll wear most of this for days, possibly weeks. Comfort was never the goal. Survival and modesty were. Let's begin with that shift or shirt, because it's the unsung hero of your wardrobe. This simple linen garment is worn directly against the skin and serves as both underwear and a barrier between your body and your itchier outer layers. It's also the thing that gets washed most often, since washing the heavy wool outerwear is impractical. So the shift takes on the noble duty of absorbing sweat and grime so the good clothes don't have to. You sleep in it, you work in it, and you change it as often as you can manage, which is not very. It is, in essence, the most important piece of clothing you own and the one you'll appreciate the least. For a man, the layers build from there. A shirt, then breeches that button just below the knee, long stockings, and a waistcoat over the shirt topped with a coat for going out. For a woman, the process is more involved and considerably more structural. Over the shift go the stays, a stiffened bodice laced snugly to support the back and shape the torso, which sounds restrictive but actually helps with the constant lifting and hauling of daily work. Then come petticoats, layered for warmth, a gown or short jacket over the top, an apron to protect it all, and a cap to cover the hair. Each piece has a purpose. None of them have buttons where you'd want them. This brings us to the fastening situation, which is its own small adventure. Many garments are held together with straight pins, actual sharp pins, dozens of them, and getting dressed means pinning yourself into your clothing each morning with the steady hands of someone who'd rather not bleed. Laces and ties handle the rest. And because no garment comes with a sewn-in pocket, you wear a separate tie-on pocket, a flat pouch fastened around the waist beneath the petticoats, and reach through a slit in the skirt. It holds your small possessions and is, functionally, the original detachable purse. Your wardrobe is also small, and I mean genuinely small. Cloth is expensive, sewing is slow, and every garment is made by hand, so most ordinary people own only a couple of outfits, one for everyday work and one finer set for church and special occasions. Clothes are mended endlessly, handed down, taken apart and resewn, and worn until they fall to pieces. The idea of a closet stuffed with options you've forgotten you own would be almost incomprehensible. Here, you wear what you have, you care for it obsessively, and you wear it again tomorrow. So now you're pinned, laced, layered, and presentable. Having invested real time into clothing you'll barely change for the next week. You're dressed for the day. The only thing you haven't done is wash, and about that we should have an honest conversation. Let's talk about hygiene, a word that's doing a lot of heavy lifting in 1776. You won't be taking a hot shower because hot showers don't exist and won't for a very long time. A full bath is a rare event involving a wooden tub, water hauled and heated bucket by bucket, and the entire family taking turns in the same increasingly suspicious water. Most days, washing means splashing your face and hands from a basin and calling it spiritually complete. Soap is harsh, homemade from animal fat and lye, and rough enough to remove dirt, skin, and your will to continue. You don't smell good. Nobody does. It's a level playing field of body odour. Let's start with why bathing is so rare, because it isn't pure laziness. Water is heavy, and every drop you use has to be hauled by hand from a well or stream, then heated over a fire that took effort to build and fuel that costs money or labour to gather. Filling a single tub means many trips, much hauling, and a long wait while it warms. After all that work, nobody wants to dump the water after one use, so the family bathes in sequence, sharing the tub and the water, with the order generally favouring whoever's deemed most important, and leaving the last bather with something closer to soup than a bath. It's a production reserved for special occasions, not a daily indulgence. There's also a lingering belief, inherited from earlier generations, that immersing yourself in water too often might actually be bad for you, that it could open the body to illness or chill. So instead of full baths, people practice what we'd call dry washing or spot cleaning. You wipe down your face, neck and hands with a damp cloth, you change your linen shift when you can, and you rely on that fresh linen layer to carry away sweat and odour. The clean shirt, not the clean body, is the real measure of tidiness here. a person could go a remarkably long time between actual baths and still consider themselves perfectly respectable. The soap deserves a moment of grim recognition. It's made at home by combining animal fat with lye leached from wood ashes, a smelly, caustic process that produces a soft, harsh soap with all the gentleness of a cheese grater. It cleans, technically, but it's rough on the skin, and not something you'd lather up with for pleasure. Fancier scented soaps exist for the wealthy, but for the average household, soap is a utilitarian tool, used sparingly on the worst of the grime and on the laundry, and treated as the labour-intensive product it is, and so, predictably, everyone smells. Bodies, clothes, homes, streets, all carry a powerful natural aroma that nobody comments on, because there's no escaping it and no reference point for anything cleaner. This is the great equalizer of the era. The farmer, the merchant, the fine lady in her best gown, all of them exist in a world without deodorant, daily showers or fresh laundry, and all of them have simply adjusted their noses accordingly. What would knock a modern person flat is, to a colonist, just the smell of Tuesday. So you've splashed your face, wiped your hands, changed your linen if you're lucky, and declared yourself clean enough to face humanity. By our standards you're not, but by the standards of 1776, you're doing fine. There is, however, one part of your body that no amount of basin water can save, and it's already aching. Let's open wide and talk about your teeth. Time to flash a smile, except you really shouldn't, because your teeth are staging a slow rebellion. There's no dentist as you'd understand one. If a tooth goes bad, you visit a tooth drawer, possibly the local blacksmith who grips the offending tooth with iron pliers and pulls while you grip the chair and your last shred of composure. There's no numbing, no rinse and spit, just leverage and prayer. Some clean their teeth with a frayed twig, a rag, or a paste of soot and salt that does roughly nothing. Toothaches are constant companions treated with clove oil, whiskey, or grim acceptance. A full set of teeth past 40 makes you a local celebrity. Let's talk about why everyone's mouth is in such poor shape. Daily tooth care is minimal and inconsistent. The lucky and the diligent might rub their teeth with a cloth, a chewed twig frayed into a brush, or a homemade powder of things like crushed shell, soot, salt, or chalk, scrubbing away with varying enthusiasm and very little effect. There's no fluoride, no soft-bristled brush, and no friendly twice-yearly cleaning to catch problems early. Most people simply let their teeth fend for themselves, and their teeth, it turns out, are not up to the task. The diet doesn't help, especially as you move up the social ladder. Sugar is increasingly available to those who can afford it, and the wealthier you are, the more sweets, fine cakes, and sugared treats you enjoy, which means the wealthier you are, the faster your teeth tend to rot. It's one of history's quiet ironies, the gleaming smile money can't buy. For poorer folk, the gritty bread, the rough diet, and years of hard chewing wear the teeth down more slowly but just as surely. Either way, decay sets in, gums suffer, and pain becomes a regular feature of life. When a tooth finally goes, treatment is brutal and brief. There's no field of dentistry as we know it, though a handful of skilled men in the larger towns are beginning to specialise in cleaning, filling, and even making false teeth. Work that included a certain famous Boston silversmith who pulled teeth and crafted dental devices between his more revolutionary activities. But for most people, dealing with a bad tooth means a visit to a tooth drawer, a barber, or whoever in town owns a sturdy pair of pliers and a confident grip. You sit, you brace, and the tooth comes out by force, with no anaesthesia beyond a swig of something strong and the support of someone holding your shoulders down. False teeth, by the way, are a real and fascinating business for those who can afford them. They're carved from ivory or bone, or built from teeth taken from animals or even from other people, and they fit poorly, stain easily, and often look unsettling. Contrary to a stubborn legend, they aren't made of wood, but they aren't comfortable either, and they certainly don't restore a natural smile. They're a status symbol as much as a function, proof that you had the means to replace what time and sugar took. An infected tooth, untreated, is no small thing. Without antibiotics, an abscess can spread, turn serious, and in the worst cases become genuinely dangerous. A reminder that in this era, a problem we'd solve with a quick prescription could spiral into a real threat to your life. So toothaches are feared, endured, and prayed over, and a mouth that still holds most of its teeth in middle age is a genuine point of pride. So you've made peace with your aching mouth and resolved not to smile too widely at anyone. Your mourning is finally complete, and now the real work begins, because the farm has been waiting patiently, and the farm waits for no one. Now it's time to work, and there's no commute, because your job is right outside the door, demanding and infinite. Roughly 9 in 10 colonists farm, which means your day is dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the relentless needs of plants and animals that do not care about your mood. You plough, you plant, you weed, you haul, you mend fences, you chase a pig that has once again achieved freedom. The tools are simple, the hours are sunrise to sunset, and the weekend is a concept that hasn't been invented. Your back becomes a topic of daily conversation. There's no clocking out, no promotion, just the comforting certainty that tomorrow looks exactly like today. Let's walk the field with you, because the work changes with the calendar and never actually stops. In spring, you're ploughing and planting, breaking the soil behind an ox or a horse if you have one, or behind your own straining body if you don't. In summer, you're weeding, watering, haying, and battling an endless invasion of weeds, pests, and weather. In autumn, it's the frantic rush of harvest, racing daylight, and the first frost to bring in the corn, the grain, the vegetables that will keep your family alive through winter. And in winter, when the fields rest, you repair tools, chop firewood, tend the animals, and patch everything that broke during the busy months. There is no off-season, there's only a different flavour of labour. The tools themselves would make a modern worker weep. Ploughs are wood and iron, heavy and crude, and they demand real strength and skill to drive straight. You cut grain with a sickle or scythe, swinging it for hours in a rhythm that punishes your shoulders and lower back. You thresh the harvested grain by beating it with a flail, then toss it in the air to let the wind carry off the chaff, a process called winnowing that is exactly as slow as it sounds. Everything is done by hand, by muscle, and by repetition, and the work leaves its mark on your body in calluses, aches, and a permanent stoop. The animals are partners in problems in equal measure. Oxen and horses do the heavy pulling, but they need feeding, watering and care every single day, holidays and illness included. Cows must be milked on schedule, whether you feel like it or not. Pigs root and escape with diabolical creativity. Chickens scatter, sheep wander, and every creature on the farm seems to operate on the principle that your convenience is none of its concern. Caring for livestock is constant, and a sick or lost animal is a genuine financial blow to a family living close to the edge. And the hours are simply brutal. You rise before dawn and work until the light fails, 6 days a week, with the Sabbath offering a pause more spiritual and restful. There's no concept of vacation, no paid time off, no sense that leisure is something you're owed. Bad weather doesn't grant a holiday. It just changes which miserable task you do. The work is tied directly to survival, because a failed harvest or a hard season can mean genuine hunger, and that knowledge sits behind every sunrise, pushing you back into the fields. What's striking is that this is normal, expected, and even quietly satisfying to the people living it. There's pride in a straight furrow, a full barn, a family fed through winter by your own hands. It's exhausting and unrelenting, but it's also the rhythm of a whole society. So you grip your tool, square your aching shoulders, and get to it, because the sun is up and the land is waiting. And when you finally pause for a drink, you'll discover that even hydration in 1776 is more complicated than you'd hope. Feeling thirsty? Let's discuss your beverage options, which are stranger than you'd think. You'll be drinking a lot of cider, the fermented apple kind, plus small beer, a weak brew so mild that children drink it at every meal. Why not just drink water? Because the well sits dangerously close to the privy and the livestock, and the connection between dirty water and getting violently ill is only dimly understood. Cider and beer feel safer, mostly because the brewing kills off the worst surprises. Rum is the harder stuff, cheap and everywhere, fueling taverns and questionable decisions alike. Hydration in 1776 comes with a faint buzz and a strong apple aftertaste. Let's begin with cider, the undisputed champion of colonial drinks. Apples grow abundantly, orchards are common, and pressing the fruit into cider is an easy way to turn a perishable harvest into something that keeps for months. The result is fermented and lightly alcoholic, and it's consumed by nearly everyone at nearly every meal, including the morning one. Families produce it by the barrel, store it in the cellar, and work their way through staggering quantities over the course of a year. It's cheap, it's reliable, and it's everywhere, which is why the apple became such a fixture of American farms in the first place. It was less about pie and more about the cup. Small beer is the other everyday staple, and despite the name, it's about modesty, not size. It's brewed to be low in alcohol, weak enough that drinking it all day doesn't impair you the way stronger drink would, and it's considered safe and nourishing for everyone, children included. The brewing process involves boiling, which, though nobody fully understands the science, happens to make the water safer to drink. So a mug of small beer is both refreshment and quiet insurance against the unseen dangers lurking in untreated water. It's the practical, humble workhorse of colonial hydration. Now, the obvious question, why not just drink plain water? The answer is part suspicion, part hard-won caution. Wells in towns often sit too close to privies and animal pens, and surface water can carry illness, so people have learned through grim experience that water sometimes makes you sick. They don't know about microbes, so they blame bad water in a vague, instinctive way and reach for cider or beer instead, which happen to be safer. In rural areas with a clean spring or fresh stream, water gets drunk more freely, but the general cultural lean is toward fermented drinks as the trustworthy default. Then there's the stronger stuff, and there's a lot of it. Rum, distilled from molasses, is cheap, plentiful, and woven deeply into colonial commerce and daily life. It's drunk straight, mixed into punches, and traded as a near currency. Whiskey is on the rise, and various spiked concoctions warm the taverns and the long winter evenings. Drinking is simply more normalized than it is today, folded into work, socializing, celebrations, and rituals, and the line between everyday beverage and intoxicant is blurrier than we draw it now. This doesn't mean everyone is staggering around constantly, though it does mean a general low hum of cider is part of the rhythm of life. People work hard, drink steadily, and consider it unremarkable. The strong, deliberate intoxication has its time and place, often at the tavern, but the daily cider and small beer are about routine and safety more than revelry. So you drain your mug, wipe your mouth, and feel marginally more human. You've eaten, dressed, laboured, and hydrated, all before most modern people have checked their phones. But there's an engine at the centre of your home that makes all of it possible, and it's hot, hungry, and a little bit dangerous. Let's pull up a stool by the hearth. Let's gather around the fireplace, the beating, crackling heart of the home. This isn't a cozy, decorative hearth. It's an enormous open fire where every single meal is cooked in heavy iron pots and kettles, dangled over the flames. If you're the one cooking, usually a woman, you spend hours bent over searing heat, hauling pots that weigh as much as a toddler, breathing smoke and wearing long skirts in close proximity to open flame. House fires and burns are tragically common, and a stray spark can end far more than dinner. The fire never fully goes out, because relighting it from scratch is a half-hour wrestling match with flint and patience. Let's appreciate just how central this fire is, because it does the work of an entire modern kitchen, and then some. It's your stove, your oven, your furnace, your water heater, and your light source, all in one smoky, sputtering installation. Meals simmer in iron pots suspended from a hook or an adjustable iron arm called a crane, which swings the pot over the flames or away to cool. Bread bakes in a heavy-lidded pot nestled in the coals or in a built-in brick oven beside the hearth. Everything you eat, drink hot, or warm yourself by flows from this single fire, which means keeping it going isn't optional. It's the difference between a functioning home and a cold, dark, hungry one. The cookware alone is a workout. Iron pots, kettles, and pans are thick, heavy, and built to last generations, which is wonderful for durability and terrible for your wrists. Lifting a full pot of stew off the fire is a genuine feat of strength, and doing it repeatedly, day after day, while leaning into the heat and smoke takes a toll. There are long-handled tools for managing the coals, trivets, and spiders that hold pans above the embers, and toasting forks and roasting jacks for meat. But no matter the gadget, the work is hot, heavy, and close to the flames. And the flames, let's be clear, are dangerous. Open fires and long, flowing skirts are a grim combination, and women cooking at the hearth are tragically vulnerable to their clothing catching fire. One of the era's most common and horrifying domestic accidents. Sparks leap onto wooden floors and thatch. A pot of boiling liquid tips and scalds. Children, ever curious, wander too close. The hearth that sustains the household also poses a constant quiet threat, and everyone in the home learns early to respect it. Smoke is the other unwelcome guest. Chimneys help, drawing much of it upward and out, and they're a real improvement over the older smoke-filled dwellings of earlier centuries, but a poorly drawing chimney, a downdraft or a smoky fire still fills the room with haze, blackens the walls and ceiling over time, and leaves a permanent campfire scent on everything and everyone. Cooking over this fire for hours means breathing that air, and the cook ends the day smelling of smoke whether she likes it or not. Then there's the sheer commitment of keeping the fire alive. You bank it carefully at night, burying the embers under ash so a glowing core survives until morning, when you coax it back to life with kindling and breath. Letting it die completely is a real setback, because relighting from scratch with flint, steel and charcloth is slow, frustrating work, and on a damp, cold morning it can feel nearly impossible. A neighbour's live coal carried over carefully is sometimes the easiest fix. So you tend the fire, stir the pot, and accept the smoke and the danger as the price of a warm meal and a warm home. The hearth gives you everything, demands constant attention, and occasionally tries to harm you. It's a relationship. And when night falls and the cooking's done, that same fire will become your main source of light, because the alternatives are dim, smelly, and rationed. Let's talk about candles. When the sun sets, the day is essentially over, and let me explain why. Light comes from candles, made by repeatedly dipping wicks into hot tallow rendered from animal fat, a process that smells precisely as delightful as it sounds. Candles are precious, so you don't burn them frivolously to scroll through anything. Poorer households use rushlights, dried reeds soaked in grease that burn fast and dim. Once darkness falls, There's little to do but stare at the embers, tell stories, or simply go to sleep, which is why colonists are tucked in absurdly early. The night is genuinely dark in a way we've forgotten, vast and quiet and faintly terrifying. Let's start with the candles themselves, because making them is a whole laborious affair. Most ordinary households use tallow candles made from rendered animal fat, and producing them is a smelly, time-consuming chore usually tackled in batches a couple of times a year. You melt the fat, then dip wicks into it again and again, building up each candle layer by patient layer, or you pour the fat into moulds if you're fortunate enough to own them. Tallow candles burn with a smoky flame, a sputtering quality, and an aroma that reminds everyone exactly what they're made of. They also soften in heat and don't keep terribly well, which is just one more thing to manage. Beeswax candles exist and are far superior, burning brighter, cleaner, and without the greasy stink, but they're expensive and reserved for churches, the wealthy, and special occasions. For the poorest households, even tallow candles are a luxury, so they turn to rushlights, simple reeds stripped and soaked in leftover grease, then lit at one end. A rushlight gives a small, flickering, short-lived flame, enough to cross a room or finish a task, but hardly the warm glow of a lamp. It's light at its most humble and frugal, squeezing illumination out of kitchen scraps. Because light is so precious, it's used carefully and never wastefully. You don't leave candles burning in empty rooms or light the whole house for the comfort of it. People cluster around a single candle or the fire to do close work, sewing, reading, mending, sharing the light the way you'd share any scarce resource. The evening's activities happen in a tight pool of dim, warm glow, with the corners of the room sinking into shadow. It makes for a cosy intimacy, sure, but it also means the dark presses in close, and your world after sunset shrinks to whatever the flame can reach. This is the real reason colonists go to bed so early and rise with the sun. It isn't just wholesome virtue, it's economics. Burning light costs money and labour, and there's only so much useful work you can do by a feeble flame anyway. The sun is free, so you wring every drop of daylight out of the working day and surrender to darkness when it falls. After a day of punishing physical labour, your body is more than ready to quit, and the early bedtime feels less like discipline and more like sweet, inevitable collapse. The darkness itself is something we can barely imagine now. There are no street lights, no glowing screens, no distant city glow on the horizon. When the candles are snuffed and the fire banked, the night is profoundly, completely dark, and outside it stretches unbroken for miles. The stars, by contrast, blaze with a brilliance most of us have never seen. It's beautiful and a little unnerving, a reminder of how small your circle of light truly is and how vast the night beyond it. So you snuff your precious candle, settle into your lumpy bed beside your sleeping family, and let the darkness take the day. You've survived your first round of 1776 from the cold, waking to the dim, early night. But there's far more to this life than a single day's routine, because the work, the trades, and the wider world are all waiting, and tomorrow we'll step out the door and into the town. Not everyone farms, so let's wander into town and meet the tradesman. Here's the blacksmith sweating beside his forge, hammering glowing iron into nails, horseshoes and tools, because if you want metal anything, this is the only place it comes from. Down the lane works the cooper, building barrels, the cordwainer stitching shoes, the chandler dipping candles, and the printer, inking type 1 painstaking letter at a time. Every object in your life is made by human hands, slowly, which is why you own remarkably few things and guard them fiercely. A skilled trade is a precious inheritance, often passed from father to son, or learned through years of apprenticeship that look a lot like unpaid servitude. Let's linger at the blacksmith's, because his shop is the closest thing your town has to a hardware store, a repair shop, and a factory combined. The fire roars, the bellows wheeze, and the smith works iron the way a sculptor works clay, except his clay is glowing orange and will sear the flesh off your hand if you forget yourself. He makes nails one at a time, which is why nails are valuable enough that people sometimes burn down abandoned buildings just to salvage them. He forges hinges, latches, ploughs, axes, kettles, and the countless small iron things your life quietly depends on. Without him, the whole community grinds to a halt. The other trades fan out from there, each one a small universe of specialized skill. The cooper builds the barrels and casks that hold everything from cider to flour to gunpowder, shaping and binding wooden staves with a precision that keeps them watertight. The cordwainer makes shoes by hand, stitching leather over wooden forms, while a separate craftsman, the cobbler, repairs them. The wheelwright builds wheels, the tanner turns hides into leather in vats that smell like the inside of a nightmare, and the hatter, weaver, tailor, and silversmith each tend their own corner of necessity. Nothing here is mass-produced. Everything is the product of a trained pair of hands and a great deal of time. How does one become a tradesman? Through apprenticeship, which is equal parts education and indentured labour. A boy, often around 14, is bound to a master craftsman for a term of years, frequently 7 during which he lives in the master's household, learns the trade by doing, and works without real wages in exchange for instruction, food, and lodging. It's a serious legal contract, and the boy is expected to obey, work hard, and not run off, though plenty of apprentices found the arrangement less than charming and voted with their feet. At the end, he becomes a journeyman, a skilled worker for hire, and eventually, with luck and capital, a master with his own shop. This system means trades tend to run in families and stay tightly held, because the knowledge is precious and the path to mastery is long. A master's tools, skills, and reputation are a genuine inheritance, sometimes more valuable than land. And because every finished good represents hours of skilled labour, the things people own are few, durable, and cared for obsessively. You don't toss out a broken pot. You take it to be mended. You don't replace worn shoes. You have them resoled until there's nothing left to save. It also means the tradesmen sit at the centre of town life, their shops doubling as gathering places where news, gossip, and increasingly dangerous political talk circulate freely. A printer in particular wields outsized influence, because he controls what gets put on paper and spread around, a power that's about to matter enormously. So you nod to the smith, dodge the tanner's stench, and head on, because there's a question that touches every one of these trades, and it's a surprisingly tricky one. How exactly do you pay for anything? Let's talk about money, which is somehow always scarce. Actual coins are rare, a chaotic mix of British shillings, Spanish dollars, and whatever foreign silver wandered in on a ship. Paper money exists, but its value lurches around unpredictably, so nobody fully trusts it. Most ordinary trade happens by barter and credit. You swap eggs for nails, labour for cloth, and keep a running tab with the local shopkeeper that everyone politely pretends will be settled eventually. Debt is woven into daily life, and falling too deep into it can land you in actual prison. Managing money in 1776 means managing relationships, reputation, and a lot of careful, anxious arithmetic. Let's start with the coins, or rather the chronic lack of them. The colonies are forbidden from minting their own gold and silver, and Britain isn't sending over a steady supply, so hard currency is perpetually in short supply. What circulates is a wild grab bag of foreign coins, with the Spanish silver dollar, the famous piece of 8, doing much of the heavy lifting. These were literally cut into pieces to make change, into halves, quarters, and eighths, which is where the old expression 2 bits for a quarter comes from. You might have British pounds, shillings, and pence in your head as the official units, but the actual metal in your hand could come from half of Europe and the Americas. Because coins are scarce, paper money fills the gap, and that's its own adventure. Individual colonies print their own paper currency, but its value swings depending on confidence, war, and how much got printed. So a paper note from one colony might be worth a fortune, a fraction, or nearly nothing depending on the day and the place. As the revolution approaches, new paper money will flood the scene to fund the cause, and it will famously lose value fast enough to spawn the phrase "not worth a continental." Holding paper money is a bit like holding an ice cube. You'd best spend it before it melts. So how do ordinary people actually transact? Mostly through barter and credit, the real machinery of the colonial economy. You trade goods and labour directly, swapping a day's work for a sack of grain, a dozen eggs for a hank of thread, firewood for help mending a fence. And when a direct swap won't work, you rely on credit, keeping running accounts with the shopkeeper, the blacksmith, the neighbour, settling up periodically with goods, labour, or whatever coin you can scrape together. The whole system runs on trust and memory, with everyone keeping mental and written ledgers of who owes what. This makes your reputation a financial instrument all its own. In a small community where everyone knows everyone, your reliability, honesty, and willingness to pay your debts determine whether people will extend you credit, and credit is survival. A reputation for skipping out on what you owe spreads fast and follows you, while a name for fair dealing is worth more than a purse of coins. Money, in other words, is deeply social, tangled up in relationships, obligations, and standing in the community. And the danger lurking under all of it is debt, because debt in 1776 has real teeth. Fall too far behind, and your creditors can take you to court, seize your property, and even have you thrown into debtor's prison, a grim institution where you're locked up for owing money you have no way to earn while locked up. It's a trap that swallowed plenty of unlucky and overextended colonists, including, at times, the famous and the powerful. So you tally your accounts, trade what you can, guard your good name, and try desperately to stay out of the red. Money here is scarce, strange, and stressful. And if you do need to take your goods or yourself somewhere to trade, you'll face yet another colonial trial, because going anywhere at all is a genuine ordeal. Let's hit the road. Need to travel somewhere? I'm so sorry. The roads, where they exist, are rutted dirt tracks that turn to soup in the rain, dust in the heat, and bone-rattling misery year-round. You walk, ride a horse, or sit in a wagon with no suspension, while every pebble transmits directly into your spine. A journey we'd cover in an hour might take you all day, and a trip between distant towns is planned like an expedition, complete with overnight stops at taverns of dubious quality. Bridges are scarce, so you ford rivers and hope. Going anywhere is slow, exhausting, and genuinely risky, which is why most people simply don't, spending their whole lives close to home. Let's examine these so-called roads, because the word is doing heroic work. The best of them are dirt tracks worn by wagons and hooves, graded by nobody and maintained by reluctant local labour when maintained at all. In dry weather they're a torment of dust and ruts. In wet weather they become a churned, sucking mud that swallows wheels, hooves, and dignity. Some stretches through swampy ground are paved with logs laid side by side, a technique called corduroy road, which keeps you out of the mud while jolting your insides loose with every plank. There are no smooth surfaces, No painted lanes, and no signs worth the name. You navigate by landmarks, memory, and asking the next person you meet. Your travel options each come with their own brand of suffering. On foot, you're slow but reliable, covering perhaps 20 miles in a hard day if the weather cooperates. On horseback, you're faster, but you're exposed to the elements, hard on your body and dependent on an animal that needs rest, feed and water. In a wagon or cart you can haul goods and family, but with no suspension to speak of, every rut and root delivers a fresh blow to your spine, and the pace is plodding. The wealthy might travel by carriage or hire a seat on a stagecoach, which sounds grand until you've spent 10 hours crammed onto a hard bench being flung against your fellow passengers. Water, where available, is often the better road. Rivers and the coast carry boats and ships that move people and cargo far more smoothly and quickly than any overland route, which is exactly why the major towns cluster along waterways. A journey that would take days of brutal land travel might be done in hours by boat, weather and tides permitting. But not everywhere has a convenient river going your direction, and the sea has its own dangers, so land travel remains an unavoidable misery for much of the population. Then there are the obstacles, which are constant and creative. Rivers without bridges must be forded at shallow crossings or navigated by ferry, where a local operator poles you across for a fee and a prayer. Bridges, where they exist, are wooden, sometimes rickety, and occasionally washed out. Weather can turn a passable road into an impassable bog overnight, and the journey itself carries real risk, from accidents and exposure to the occasional highway robbery on a lonely stretch, which is why travelling alone over long distances is a nerve-wracking proposition. All of this means that for most people the world is small. You live, work, marry and die within a short radius of where you were born, and a trip to a town 50 miles away is a major event you might undertake only a handful of times in your life. The stagecoach lines, post roads and ferries stitch the colonies loosely together, but distance is felt keenly, and far-flung places feel genuinely far. So you brace yourself, choose your least bad option, and set off, knowing the trip will take longer and hurt more than you'd like. And once you arrive, exhausted and mud-spattered, you might wonder how anyone keeps in touch across these distances at all. The answer is slowly, expensively, and with a lot of patience. Let's talk about the news. Let's talk about staying informed. A quaint notion in a world with no instant anything. News travels at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, which means by the time you hear about an event it's already old, occasionally by weeks or months. Newspapers exist, printed slowly and read aloud in taverns so even those who can't read can follow along. Letters are precious, expensive to send, and may take ages to arrive if they arrive at all. Word of mouth fills the gaps with rumour, gossip, and creative exaggeration. In 1776, being out of the loop isn't a personal failing, it's simply the default condition of being alive. Let's start with the newspapers, which are nothing like the daily floods of information we drown in now. A colonial newspaper is typically a weekly affair, just a few pages printed on a hand-operated press, packed with shipping notices, advertisements, official announcements, essays, and news copied from other papers and from Europe. The news inside is often weeks or even months old, especially anything from across the ocean, because it had to cross that ocean first by sail. Papers are passed from hand to hand, read until they're soft, and pored over by people hungry for word of the wider world. In an age of revolution brewing, they're also potent weapons, spreading ideas and stoking sentiment with every printed page. Because literacy isn't universal, newspapers are frequently read aloud, and the tavern is the natural amphitheatre for this. A man with letters reads the latest paper to a room of listeners, who then debate, argue, and embellish what they've heard. This is how news genuinely circulates, not silently to individuals but out loud, communally, woven into conversation and shouting matches over cider. The result is that a single newspaper can inform a whole town, and a single fiery essay can light up an entire region as it's read, discussed, and reprinted elsewhere. Letters are the personal lifeline, and they're a serious undertaking. Sending a letter is expensive, and in a quirk of the system, it's often the recipient who pays to receive it, based on distance and the number of sheets. Paper is precious enough that writers cram every inch, sometimes turning the page sideways and writing across their own lines to save space. A letter might take days or weeks to arrive, carried by post riders along the post roads, handed to a travelling acquaintance or sent aboard a ship. When one finally reaches you, it's an event, read eagerly and often aloud to the whole family, then saved and reread. The postal system, such as it is, has been steadily improving, with post roads and riders connecting the major towns and a growing network that one famous printer-turned-postmaster did much to organise. But it's still slow, weather-dependent, and far from the reliable machine we take for granted. A reply to a letter could take a month or more to come back, which means correspondence happens at a stately patient pace, and any conversation conducted by mail unfolds over seasons rather than seconds. Filling all the gaps is word of mouth, the oldest information network of all, and the least reliable. Travellers, peddlers, sailors, and neighbours carry news, rumour, and gossip from place to place, and by the time a story has passed through enough mouths, it may bear only a passing resemblance to the truth. A piece of distant news might arrive garbled, exaggerated, or flatly wrong, and there's no quick way to check. People simply learn to live with uncertainty, to weigh sources, and to wait for confirmation that may never neatly come. So you absorb what news you can, knowing it's old, partial, and possibly mangled, and you accept that the world beyond your horizon moves in a fog of delay. It's a slower, quieter, more patient way of knowing things. And speaking of knowing things, let's consider how anyone in this world learns to read those precious newspapers in the first place, because education here is far from guaranteed. Now, education, which ranges from limited to non-existent depending on where you're standing. In parts of New England, children might attend a small one-room schoolhouse, or a dame school run by a local woman in her own kitchen, learning letters, sums, and a great deal of scripture. Elsewhere, formal schooling is a luxury, and learning happens at home, in the fields, or not at all. Books are scarce and treasured, often just the Bible and an almanac. Reading is valued more than writing, and girls' education frequently stops early so they can get to the real curriculum: cooking, sewing, and running a household. Most learning here is practical, immediate, and aimed squarely at survival. Let's begin with the dame school, the humble first rung of colonial education. A local woman, often a widow, or someone with a bit of learning and a spare corner, takes in young children and teaches them their letters and basic reading for a small fee, all while going about her own household work. The classroom is her kitchen, the curriculum is the alphabet and simple words, and the teaching tool is often a hornbook, a small wooden paddle holding a printed sheet protected by a thin layer of translucent horn. It's modest, informal, and for many children the only formal schooling they'll ever get. In New England especially, education is taken more seriously than elsewhere, largely for religious reasons, because being able to read the Bible yourself is considered spiritually important. Some towns are required to maintain a school, and one-room schoolhouses gather children of all ages under a single teacher, often a young man earning a bit of money before moving on. Reading is taught first and most thoroughly, with writing and arithmetic following for those who continue. The famous primer of the age teaches letters alongside rhyming verses and heavy doses of religious instruction, so children learn their ABCs and their catechism in the same breath. The schooling itself is strict, repetitive, and short on comfort. Lessons revolve around memorization and recitation. Discipline is firm and physical, and the schoolhouse is cold in winter and stifling in summer. Attendance is irregular, because children are needed at home for the endless work of a farm, so school happens around the demands of planting, harvest, and the seasons. A child might attend in the slow winter months and vanish entirely during the busy growing season. Education competes with survival, and survival usually wins. Beyond the basics, opportunities narrow sharply. Boys from well-off families might attend a Latin grammar school to prepare for college, drilling in Latin and Greek in hopes of entering the ministry, law, or medicine, and a small handful go on to the colonial colleges. But this elite path is open to very few. For the vast majority of children, learning means picking up practical skills at home and through work, and book learning beyond reading is a luxury reserved for those with money and ambition. Girls' education is more limited still. They typically learn reading, perhaps some writing and figures, and then their schooling bends decisively toward the domestic arts, sewing, spinning, cooking, and the management of a household, the skills considered essential for their expected future. Some girls from prosperous families receive more, learning music, needlework, and social graces, but formal academic education for women is rare, and the idea of higher education for them is largely unthinkable in this era. The result is a patchwork of literacy, higher in New England, lower elsewhere, higher among men than women, higher among the prosperous than the poor. Many people can read at least a little, fewer write with ease, and learning, for most, is a practical tool rather than a path to advancement. So whatever schooling a child gets is squeezed in, valued, and quickly redirected toward the labour that fills every colonial life. Because childhood here isn't a long, sheltered idyll. It's a brief apprenticeship in survival, as we'll see. Let's check on the children, who are working. Childhood in 1776 is brief and busy. Almost as soon as they can walk steadily, little ones are handed tasks, gathering eggs, fetching water, scaring birds from crops, minding younger siblings, and spinning wool. There are toys, simple ones, carved wood and rag dolls, but free time is limited because there's always something that needs doing. Many children are sent off to apprentice in a trade or work in another household, sometimes as young as 7, learning a craft while essentially labouring for room and board. The modern idea of a long, protected, carefree childhood would baffle a colonial parent who needs every available pair of hands. Let's start with just how early the work begins, because it's earlier than you'd think. A child of 4 or 5 is already being given small, manageable chores, and the responsibilities pile on quickly from there. By the time they're 7 or 8, children are doing real, useful labour, hauling water, gathering firewood, feeding chickens, weeding the garden, watching the baby, and learning the endless skills of running a farm and household. There's no notion that children should be shielded from work. On the contrary, work is how they learn, contribute, and earn their place in a family operating on tight margins. Idle hands are a luxury no one can afford. This doesn't mean childhood is joyless, because children find fun where they can, as children always have. They play with simple toys, hoops to roll, balls, marbles, carved wooden figures, and rag dolls, and they invent games out of whatever's at hand. They run, climb, fish, and roam the fields and woods, and there's real laughter and mischief in colonial childhood. But playtime is fitted around chores rather than the other way around, and a child who lingers too long at play will be called sharply back to the task that's waiting. Fun is the reward for, and the gap between, the work. a significant feature of colonial childhood is being sent away to work or learn, which strikes modern sensibilities as startling. Children, especially boys, are commonly placed in other households as apprentices or servants, sometimes as young as 7, to learn a trade, gain skills, or simply earn their keep. They live with the master's family, work long days, and are expected to obey as members of that household. Even children of well-off families might be sent to live with relatives or others to learn manners and skills. The bond between parent and child is real and loving, but the practice of placing out children reflects a world where labour and learning matter more than keeping the family physically together. Looming over all of childhood is the hard reality of child mortality, which shapes the era profoundly. Disease, accidents, and the dangers of infancy claim a heartbreaking number of children before they reach adulthood, and few families are spared loss. This doesn't make parents love their children any less, despite old myths to the contrary, but it does mean that childhood unfolds in the shadow of fragility, and that reaching adulthood is itself an achievement. Faith, hope, and a certain hard-won resilience help families bear losses that would shatter us today. The clothing and treatment of children also reflect their place in this working world. Once out of infancy, children are dressed much like miniature adults and folded into adult routines and responsibilities. The sharp line we draw between the world of children and the world of grown-ups is far blurrier here, with children present at work, at worship, and at social gatherings, learning the rhythms of adult life by living inside them from the start. So colonial children grow up fast, working, learning, playing in the cracks, and shouldering real responsibility from a tender age. They're cherished and they're needed, often in the same breath. And no one feels the weight of this demanding household world more constantly than the women running it. So let's follow one through her endless day. Let's follow a colonial woman through her day, assuming you can keep up because she can't stop. She's awake before dawn, building the fire, then cooking, hauling water, churning butter, baking bread, brewing, gardening, tending poultry, spinning, sewing, mending, washing, and minding a crowd of children, often while pregnant. There is no off switch, no clear end to the workday, just a continuous current of labour that resumes the moment one task ends. Legally, she has almost no independent rights. Under the rules of the time, a married woman's property and earnings belong to her husband. She holds the household together through sheer relentless effort, largely uncredited, entirely indispensable. Let's walk through that day, because the sheer volume of it is staggering. She rises first, coaxing the banked fire back to life so there's heat and a way to cook. Then comes breakfast for the whole household, which means hauling water, tending pots over the open hearth, and feeding however many mouths depend on her. From there, the tasks cascade without pause, milking the cows, churning cream into butter, making cheese, baking bread in the brick oven or the coals, tending the kitchen garden, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs, and preparing the next meal almost as soon as the last is cleared. Her hands are busy from before sunrise to well after dark, and that's only the food. Layered on top is the production of cloth and clothing, an enormous job in itself. She spins wool and flax into thread, weaves or has it woven into cloth, and sews and mends the family's garments by hand, stitch by painstaking stitch. She makes soap and candles in their seasons, both filthy, smelly chores. She preserves food for winter, salting meat, drying fruit, putting up what the garden yields. She does the laundry, a brutal all-day ordeal in its own right. Each of these tasks would be a serious undertaking on its own. Together, they form a workload with no real beginning or end. Through all of it, she's caring for children, often many of them, and frequently while carrying or nursing another. Childcare isn't a separate block of time. It's woven through every other task. the baby on a hip while the butter is churned, the toddlers underfoot while the bread bakes, the older children pressed into helping with the younger ones. She teaches, disciplines, feeds, clothes, and tends to all of them. And when illness strikes the household, she's the nurse too, sitting up through the night with the sick. Her legal and social position makes this even more striking. Under the doctrine that governs married women, she has little independent legal identity. Her property and earnings generally belong to her husband. She cannot vote, and her public role is sharply circumscribed. Yet within the household she wields enormous practical authority, managing a complex operation, making countless decisions, and at times acting as a deputy for her husband, running affairs when he's away. Her power is real but informal, exercised through competence rather than recognised right. Unmarried women and widows occupy a different but no less demanding position. A widow might run a farm, a shop or a tavern on her own, taking on responsibilities and a measure of legal standing she'd lack as a wife. Some women work as midwives, seamstresses, innkeepers or shopkeepers, contributing skills the community depends on. But whatever her status, a woman's life is defined by relentless, varied, physically demanding labour that holds her household and, by extension, her community together. It's work that's both essential and invisible, the kind of labour that's only noticed when it stops. So she keeps going, task after task, day after day, carrying the household on her shoulders without applause or rest. And among the heaviest and most dangerous parts of many women's lives is the bearing of children itself, a matter that deserves to be spoken of with care. Now let's talk about childbirth, handled with the seriousness it deserves, because in 1776 it's genuinely dangerous. There are no hospitals for it, no anaesthesia, and no real understanding of infection. A woman gives birth at home, attended by a midwife and a gathering of female neighbours and relatives who bring experience, comfort, and steady hands. Skilled midwives save countless lives, but complications that we treat routinely today can be fatal for mother, child, or both. Women often bear many children across their lives, facing this risk again and again. Every successful birth is a small triumph against long odds, and every mother who survives has earned a quiet, enormous courage. Childbirth in this era is, above all, a community of women. When a woman's time comes, word goes out, and the experienced women of the neighbourhood gather at her home to support her through the labour. At the centre is the midwife, a respected and skilled figure who has often attended hundreds of births and carries hard-won practical knowledge, passed down through experience rather than formal training. She guides the labour, offers remedies and reassurance, and does what can be done to bring mother and child safely through. The gathering of women provides not just practical help, but emotional strength, surrounding the labouring mother with care and solidarity. The conditions, by our standards, are perilous, though no one of the time fully grasps why. There's no understanding of germs, so the importance of cleanliness in preventing deadly infection isn't known. An infection after childbirth is a serious and too common danger. There's no effective pain relief, so a woman endures labour with only the support of those around her, the comfort of familiar hands and her own endurance. And there's little that can be done when a birth goes seriously wrong, since the medical interventions we rely on today simply don't exist. A complicated delivery can become life-threatening with frightening speed. The risks are real and ever-present, and families know it. Childbirth is one of the gravest dangers a woman faces in her life, and the possibility of death, of the mother, the child, or both, hangs over each delivery. Women sometimes set their affairs in order and say their goodbyes before their time comes, aware that they may not survive it. That this danger is faced not once but repeatedly, across many pregnancies over the years makes the courage involved all the more profound. To bear children in this age is to face mortal risk again and again with clear eyes. And yet, it's important to say, most births do succeed, and skilled midwives bring countless mothers and babies safely through. The knowledge these women carry, accumulated through long experience and shared among them, is genuinely effective in the great majority of cases. New life arrives, is welcomed with relief and joy, and the cycle continues. The fear and the danger coexist with hope, celebration, and the deep bonds formed among the women who gather to help one another through. The arrival of a healthy child is met with gratitude that we, with our safer modern births, can scarcely imagine, because everyone present understands what was risked. The mother who comes through is honoured, the new life is cherished, and the community that gathered to help shares in the relief. It's a moment of triumph earned against real and understood danger. So we tip our hats, sincerely, to the mothers of this era and to the midwives and women who supported them, facing one of life's most dangerous passages with courage, knowledge, and care. Their resilience built the generations that followed, and the bonds that brought those women together began, often, with another colonial milestone, the long and carefully watched road of courtship and marriage, which had a few customs that may surprise you. Let's talk about romance, which is more practical than passionate. Marriage in 1776 is partly about affection and largely about survival. 2 people, 2 families, and a household that needs running. Courtship is supervised, modest, and slow. And here's a genuine, much-discussed custom of the era. Bundling, where a courting couple might be permitted to lie in bed together overnight, fully clothed and sometimes separated by a board or a sewn bundling bag, so they could talk and grow close while staying, in theory, entirely proper. Whether it always worked as intended is a question that amused everyone then, and amuses historians now. Marriage, once made, is meant to last for life. Let's start with what marriage actually means here, because it's a serious economic and social partnership as much as a romantic one. A household is a working unit, and it needs both a man and a woman to function, each handling essential and complementary labour. A man without a wife struggles to keep a home running. A woman without a husband faces a precarious legal and economic position. So marriage is, in large part, about building a viable household, joining families, and securing one's place in the community. Love and affection certainly matter, and many marriages are genuinely warm, but they're built on a practical foundation that nobody pretends to ignore. Courtship is conducted under watchful eyes. A young couple's growing attachment unfolds with the awareness and often the involvement of their families, especially among the propertied classes, where matches carry real consequences for land and inheritance. There are visits, conversations, walks, and the slow, supervised work of getting to know one another within the bounds of propriety. Parental approval matters, sometimes decisively, and the community keeps a collective eye on who is courting whom. Privacy is scarce, and reputation is everything, so courtship is a careful dance performed largely in public view. Which brings us to bundling, the custom everyone wants to hear about, and yes, it's real. In some communities, particularly in chilly New England, a courting couple might be allowed to spend the night together in the same bed, fully dressed, as a way to talk privately and grow close during the long, cold nights, all while remaining, in principle, perfectly chaste. To enforce the chastity part, families employed safeguards. The couple stayed clothed, a long wooden bundling board might be placed down the middle of the bed to keep them physically separated, or one party might be sewn or wrapped into a bundling bag. It was a practical accommodation to cold houses' scarce privacy, and the desire to let couples get acquainted, hedged about with measures meant to keep things proper. How well bundling actually preserved propriety is, let's say, a matter that raised eyebrows even at the time. Critics fretted that the custom invited exactly the kind of trouble it was meant to prevent, and the practice generated plenty of moralizing, joking, and debate. It gradually fell out of favour, but for a time it was an accepted and unremarkable part of courtship in certain regions, a window into a world that balanced practicality and propriety in ways we'd find startling. Once a couple decided to marry, the union was made public and official. In many communities, the intended marriage was announced ahead of time, the reading of the banns, giving anyone with an objection a chance to raise it. Weddings themselves were often simple affairs compared to today, the real significance lying in the joining of two lives and households, rather than in elaborate ceremony. And once married, the couple was bound for life, divorce being extremely difficult and rare, so the choice carried enormous weight. So courtship was careful, marriage was practical and permanent, and a few customs along the way were stranger than fiction. With a household established and children on the way, a family faced all the perils of colonial life together, and chief among those perils was getting sick, because the cure was often worse than the disease. Let's visit the doctor. Feeling unwell? Let's visit a doctor, though you may regret it. Medicine in 1776 still leans heavily on the ancient idea that illness comes from an imbalance of bodily fluids, so the leading treatments are bloodletting, blistering, and purging, all designed to drain something out of you. Got a fever? They'll open a vein and let the blood flow into a bowl. Feeling poorly? Here's a violent purgative and a cheerful goodbye. There are skilled, caring physicians doing their honest best with the knowledge available, but germ theory is decades away, so even good intentions can do harm. For many ailments, you're frankly better off resting, drinking fluids, and quietly avoiding the doctor entirely. Let's start with the theory behind the treatments, because it explains the alarming methods. Much of medicine still rests on the ancient notion that the body contains 4 fluids, or humours, and that health depends on keeping them in balance. Illness, in this view, means the humours are out of whack, so the logical cure is to remove the excess by draining blood, inducing vomiting, purging the bowels, or raising blisters to draw out the bad. It's a coherent system built on entirely wrong premises, which means the treatments follow a confident internal logic straight toward outcomes that often did more harm than good. Bloodletting is the signature therapy, applied to a startling range of complaints. A physician opens a vein and lets a measured quantity of blood flow out, or applies leeches to do the job more gently, in the belief that this restores balance and relieves the illness. For a fever, an inflammation, or nearly anything that seems like an excess, out comes the blood. In moderation, it might do little harm. In the aggressive doses sometimes favoured, it weakens an already sick patient at the worst possible moment. It's one of history's great medical missteps, performed with the utmost seriousness by respected practitioners. Purging and blistering round out the heroic toolkit. Strong medicines are given to induce vomiting or empty the bowels, often containing harsh substances, including mercury-based compounds whose toxic effects weren't understood. Blistering involves applying caustic substances to the skin to raise a blister, on the theory that drawing fluid to the surface pulls illness out of the body. These treatments are unpleasant, sometimes dangerous, and frequently leave the patient worse off. Yet they're administered with full confidence by doctors who genuinely believe they're helping. The doctors themselves are a varied lot. A handful have formal training, perhaps from a colonial medical college or study abroad, and bring real learning and skill, though much of that learning is built on the flawed foundations of the day. Many more learned by apprenticeship, working alongside an established physician and picking up the trade by doing. And the line between doctor, surgeon, apothecary, and outright quack can be blurry, with confident salesmen peddling cures of dubious merit alongside earnest, capable practitioners. There's no licensing system worth the name to sort the skilled from the dangerous, so a patient's fate depends heavily on luck and reputation. For many people, the doctor is a last resort anyway, both because of cost and because home and folk remedies are the first line of defence. Households keep their own stores of herbal medicines, traditional treatments, and accumulated wisdom. And the woman of the house is often the family's first nurse and pharmacist. Some of these remedies have genuine value, drawing on real properties of plants. Others are useless or worse, but they're cheaper, closer at hand, and sometimes gentler than the heroic interventions of a physician. The hard truth is that for a great many common ailments, the body's own resilience plus rest, fluids, and time did more healing than the era's medicine could, and avoiding the doctor's bleeding bowl was often the wiser course. So you weigh your options, brace for the cure, and hope your constitution is stronger than the treatment. And among all the illnesses that could strike, one inspired more dread than any other, a disease that swept through towns like a scythe, which we'll face next. Let's talk about the disease everyone fears most, smallpox. It sweeps through towns in waves, killing many and leaving survivors scarred for life, and there's no cure once it takes hold. But this is also a moment of remarkable early medicine, because colonists practice variolation, deliberately exposing a healthy person to a small dose of the disease to produce a milder case and lasting protection. It's risky, controversial, and frightening, yet it works often enough to matter. During the Revolution, the practice becomes so important that troops are inoculated to keep armies from being wiped out by infection. Living in 1776 means living alongside epidemics and making hard, courageous choices to survive them. Let's understand why smallpox inspires such dread. It's a fearsome, highly contagious disease that spreads rapidly through a community, striking with fever, aches, and then the characteristic eruption of sores across the body. It kills a significant share of those it infects, and there's no medicine that can cure it once it sets in. Those who survive are often left permanently marked, their skin pitted with scars, and some are left blind. When word spreads that smallpox has appeared, genuine fear ripples through a town, because everyone knows what it can do and how little can be done to stop it. The disease shapes daily life and decisions in profound ways. An outbreak can empty a town, as those who are able flee to the countryside to escape it. Trade halts, gatherings cease, and homes with the sick are sometimes marked and avoided. Whole families can be devastated in a matter of weeks. Because so many adults who survived childhood exposure are immune, it's often the young and the newly arrived who suffer most, which adds a particular cruelty to its toll. Living with the constant possibility of such an outbreak is simply part of the era's background fear. Now, the remarkable part. Colonists have a real, if frightening, defense in variolation, also called inoculation. The idea is to deliberately give a healthy person a controlled case of smallpox by introducing material from an infected person, usually through a small cut in the skin. The result is typically a milder illness than catching it naturally, followed by lifelong immunity. It's a genuinely effective preventive measure, decades before the safer vaccine would be developed, and it represents a striking piece of early medical insight in an age that got so much else wrong. But variolation is far from risk-free, and it's deeply controversial. The inoculated person really does get smallpox, just usually a milder form, which means they can fall seriously ill and even die from the procedure, though at far lower rates than from the natural disease. They're also contagious during their illness and can spread it to others, which is why inoculation is sometimes done in isolated houses set aside for the purpose. The practice sparked heated debate, with passionate advocates pointing to the lives saved and fierce opponents horrified at the idea of deliberately infecting the healthy. It's a wrenching gamble, weighing a known smaller risk against a larger looming one. The stakes become especially clear with the coming of war. Armies packed together in camps are devastatingly vulnerable to smallpox, and the threat to the revolutionary cause is severe enough that a sweeping decision is made to inoculate the troops, a bold and consequential move to keep the army from being destroyed by disease rather than by the enemy. It's a vivid example of how, in this era, surviving the unseen enemies of illness could matter as much as surviving any battle. So you weigh the terrible odds, make your frightening choice, and hope to come through scarred but alive and protected. Smallpox is the great terror, but it's far from the only unwelcome thing sharing your world. Some of your tormentors are far smaller, far more numerous, and far more difficult to evict, as we'll scratch our way through next. Let's address the tiny tenants sharing your home, because you're not living alone. Lice colonize scalps with democratic enthusiasm, hopping between heads regardless of wealth or status. Fleas leap from the livestock to the dog to you, leaving itchy reminders of their visit. Bedbugs lurk in the straw and seams of your mattress, emerging at night to dine while you sleep. Flies swarm the kitchen, the privy and the dinner table with equal interest. People fight back with combs, herbs and constant scratching, but total victory is impossible. You simply learn to coexist, accepting that your body is, at any given moment, a bustling and fully occupied ecosystem. Let's begin with lice, the most sociable of your unwanted guests. They settle into the hair and clothing and spread with cheerful ease from one person to the next, passed along through close contact, shared beds, borrowed hats, and the simple crowdedness of colonial life. No one is exempt. Lice make no distinctions of class or cleanliness, infesting the heads of the poor and the powdered wigs of the wealthy alike. People comb them out with fine-toothed combs, pick through one another's hair in a grooming ritual as old as humanity, and apply various remedies of mixed effectiveness. But the lice always seem to come back because there's simply no way to escape exposure in such close quarters. Fleas are the jumpy, biting nuisance that comes with living alongside animals. With livestock often kept close, dogs and cats wandering the home, and rodents lurking in the walls and stores, fleas have endless hosts to leap between, and you're one of them. Their bites leave you itching, and they're nearly impossible to be rid of given how thoroughly animals are woven into daily life. You might strew certain herbs thought to repel them or beat the bedding, but the fleas persist, an itchy fact of life that everyone simply endures with the occasional scratch and sigh. Then there are the bedbugs, the nighttime ambushers lurking in your bedding. The straw-stuffed mattresses and wooden bed frames give them ideal hiding places, and they emerge in the dark to feed while you sleep, leaving rows of itchy bites as their calling card. Battling them means periodically emptying and replacing the straw, scalding the bed frame, and waging a war you can never quite win. They're a persistent torment, and a bad infestation can make a night's rest miserable, which, given how hard you've worked all day, feels especially unfair. Flies and other pests round out the swarming cast. With no screens on the windows, no refrigeration, and a privy and animals close at hand, flies have a paradise to thrive in, buzzing around food, faces, and every surface. They contaminate what you eat, pester you constantly, and breed with abandon in the warm months. Other insects from mosquitoes near standing water, to the various crawling things drawn to a home full of food and warmth, add to the general sense that the boundary between your living space and the insect world is thin to non-existent. The deeper truth is that without modern pest control, sealed homes, and an understanding of how these creatures spread illness, total victory is simply impossible. People do what they can, cleaning, combing, strewing herbs, beating bedding, replacing straw, but they live in a constant low-grade coexistence with the small life forms that share their world. The expectation isn't to be free of pests, it's to keep them at a tolerable level and accept the itching as part of being alive. So you scratch, you comb, you beat the bedding, and you make a grudging peace with the multitudes who share your home and your skin. They're not going anywhere, and neither are you. And speaking of waging losing battles against filth, there's one chore so grueling it could consume an entire day, leaving everyone exhausted and the laundry only briefly clean. Let's brave wash day. Let's tackle laundry and clear your entire day, because washing clothes in 1776 is brutal labour. There's no machine, no detergent, no warm cycle. You haul gallons of water, heat it over the fire, scrub each garment by hand with harsh lye soap, wring out the heavy wet fabric until your hands ache, and hang everything to dry on bushes, fences or lines. It's so exhausting that many households do a major wash only once a month, or even less, which explains a great deal about the general aroma of the era. Linens get the most attention because they sit against the skin. Everything else simply waits, accumulating character, until the next dreaded laundry day. Let's walk through the ordeal step by punishing step, starting with the water. Before a single garment is cleaned, you have to haul water, lots of it, from the well or stream to the house, bucket by heavy bucket, then heat much of it over the fire. Water is heavy, the trips are many, and this alone is a serious morning's work before the actual washing has even begun. There's no tap to turn, no hose to fill a basin. Every drop is carried and warmed by hand, which is why laundry is a full-day undertaking and never a quick chore. Next comes the washing itself, which is hard on the fabric and harder on the hands. Garments are soaked, then scrubbed against a board or beaten and worked in tubs with harsh homemade soap. The same caustic lye soap that's rough enough to irritate the skin. Stubborn stains and heavily soiled items might be boiled in a large kettle to loosen the grime, then scrubbed again. The work is hot, wet and physically grueling, leaving the washer with aching arms, raw hands and a back that won't soon forgive her. It's among the most despised of all household labours, and for good reason. After washing comes rinsing and wringing, which are no easier. Each piece must be rinsed clean of soap, often in multiple changes of water, and then wrung out by hand, an exhausting task with heavy sodden fabric that fights back with every twist. Wet wool and linen are remarkably weighty, and wringing a day's worth of laundry leaves the hands cramped and the whole body weary. Only then can the clothes finally be hung to dry, draped over fences, bushes or lines, where they're at the mercy of the weather and may take a day or more to fully dry. Because the whole process is so demanding, laundry is done infrequently, often just once a month or even less for the heavier items, and this shapes the rhythm of the household. There's typically a designated wash day, a recurring ordeal everyone knows and quietly dreads, sometimes followed by a day of ironing with heavy flat irons heated at the fire. The infrequency also explains the era's relationship with cleanliness. With full washes so rare, the linen shift worn against the skin does the daily work of absorbing sweat and grime, and it's the item changed and laundered most often, while outer garments go far longer between washings. It's worth pausing to appreciate just how much human effort goes into something we now accomplish by pressing a button. An entire day of hauling, heating, scrubbing, wringing and hanging produces clean clothes that stay clean only briefly before the cycle must begin again. It's relentless, thankless, and physically draining. One more heavy stone in the already crushing load of household labour that falls largely on women's shoulders. so you finish wash day with aching arms, raw hands, and a quiet resolve to put it off as long as humanly possible next time. Clean laundry, briefly achieved, at enormous cost. And while you're contending with the everyday miseries of filth and pests and labour, there's a season that turns the whole struggle up to its harshest setting, when simply staying warm becomes a daily project. Let's face the colonial winter. Let's brace for winter, which in 1776 is a serious adversary. Your house leaks heat through every gap, so even with the fire roaring, the corners of the room stay bitterly cold, and your breath hangs in the air indoors. You pile on layers, huddle near the hearth, and warm your bed beforehand with a metal bed warmer full of glowing coals, carefully, because setting your own bedding on fire is a real and recurring hazard. Tucking a heated stone or a foot stove near your toes helps you sleep. Frost creeps across the inside of the windows, water freezes in the basin overnight, and you measure success simply by waking up warm enough to do it all again. Let's start with why your home is so cold despite the roaring fire. The open fireplace, for all its smoky glory, is a deeply inefficient heater, sending most of its warmth straight up the chimney and out into the night while the room struggles to hold any of it. Houses are drafty, with gaps around doors and windows and walls that let the cold seep in freely. The result is that the area right in front of the fire might be pleasantly warm, even too warm, while the rest of the room remains frigid and the corners stay cold enough to see your breath. Heating a colonial home evenly is simply not possible. You heat a small zone and cluster within it. This creates the classic winter predicament. You're roasting on one side and freezing on the other. Sit by the fire and your front bakes while your back goes cold, prompting the constant rotation of turning yourself like something on a spit to share the warmth around. Families gather tightly near the hearth in the evenings, drawn into the small circle of heat, because to step away is to step into the cold. The fire is the heart of winter survival, and proximity to it is precious, jealously guarded real estate on the bitterest nights. Then there's the challenge of sleeping, since the bedrooms and lofts are far from the fire and brutally cold. To make a bed bearable, you warm it first with a bed warmer, a long-handled covered metal pan filled with hot coals, passed between the sheets to take the chill off, a task requiring care to avoid scorching the bedding or starting a fire. Heated stones or bricks wrapped in cloth are tucked near the feet to provide lingering warmth through the night. You pile on every blanket and quilt you own, share body heat with whoever you're sleeping beside, and burrow in against the cold that presses down once the warming is done. People develop a whole arsenal of small comforts to fight the chill. The foot stove, a small metal box holding hot coals, can be carried about and tucked under the feet, a portable bit of warmth especially prized during the long, cold sit in an unheated meeting house on a winter Sabbath. Warm clothing is layered on, indoors and out, and the practical realities of cold dictate everything from how rooms are used to how late you stay up. Winter is a season of constant, low-level effort just to stay comfortable enough to function. And the cold has real teeth beyond mere discomfort. Water freezes indoors overnight, ink freezes in the well, and frost forms on the inside of the windows. Going out into the deep cold to tend animals or fetch wood is genuinely hard and sometimes dangerous, and the threat of frostbite is real for those caught out too long. Winter demands respect, and a hard one tests every household's stores of food, firewood and endurance to the limit. So you bank the fire, warm the bed, tuck a hot stone at your feet, and burrow in against the long, dark cold, counting the weeks until spring. Surviving winter is its own quiet victory, and whatever the season, you live in a community with rules, and breaking them brings consequences that are public, painful, and meant to be seen, as we'll witness next. Let's talk about law and order, which in 1776 is loud, public, and deeply uncomfortable. Punishment isn't hidden away. It's a community spectacle designed to shame. Commit a minor offence and you might find yourself locked in the stocks or the pillory in the town square, hands and head clamped in wood while neighbours gawk, scold, and occasionally throw things. More serious crimes earn public whippings, branding, or fines that ruin a family. There's no police force as we know it, just constables, night watchmen, and the powerful pressure of everyone knowing everyone else's business. In a small town, your reputation is your shield, and losing it in front of the whole community is a punishment all its own. Let's start with the philosophy behind it, because the public nature of punishment is the whole point. Justice in this era isn't about quietly removing wrongdoers from society. It's about making an example of them in front of everyone. Shame is the central tool. By punishing offenders openly, before the assembled community, the authorities aim to humiliate the guilty, deter others, and reinforce the shared moral order. In tight-knit towns where reputation governs everything, this exposure is devastatingly effective, often hurting more than the physical penalty itself. The stocks and the pillory are the iconic instruments of this approach. In the stocks, an offender sits with feet and sometimes hands locked in a wooden frame in a public place, immobilized and exposed for hours. In the pillory, the head and hands are clamped through holes in an upright board, leaving the person standing on display unable to shield their face. Passers-by gawk, mock, scold, and sometimes pelt the offender with refuse, turning the square into a theatre of humiliation. It's uncomfortable, degrading, and entirely public, which is exactly the intent. More serious offences bring harsher physical punishments, also carried out in the open. Public whipping is common, with the offender's bare back lashed before a watching crowd. Branding marks a criminal permanently with a sign of their offence, a lasting badge of shame burned into the skin. Other penalties might include having an ear cropped, or being forced to wear a letter or sign announcing the crime. Heavy fines can devastate a family's finances, and for the gravest crimes, the ultimate penalty of execution, typically by hanging, is carried out publicly as the most severe deterrent of all. There's no police force in the modern sense to enforce all this. Order is kept by constables, often ordinary men serving in the role as a civic duty, and by night watchmen who patrol the streets after dark, calling out the hours and watching for trouble. But the real engine of social control is the community itself. In a place where everyone knows everyone, where your business is half the town's business, the watchful eyes and wagging tongues of your neighbours do much of the work of keeping people in line. Stepping out of bounds means facing not just official punishment, but the lasting judgment of everyone you know. This is why reputation is everything, functioning as both shield and currency. A good name secures you credit, trust, marriage prospects, and standing. A tarnished one follows you relentlessly in a society where you can't simply move away and start fresh among strangers. The public punishments work precisely because they strike at this reputation, branding a person, sometimes literally, as one who broke the community's rules. To be shamed before your neighbours is to lose something that's genuinely hard to win back. So you mind the rules, guard your good name, and avoid the square on the day the stocks are occupied, unless you've come to gawk like everyone else. Justice here is harsh, public, and built on shame. But community life isn't all watchful eyes and punishment. There's a warm, lively place at the heart of every town where people gather to drink, talk, argue, and increasingly to plot. Let's step into the tavern. Let's step into the tavern, the genuine heart of colonial social life. Part inn, part restaurant, part post office, part news hub, and part political club. The tavern is where everyone gathers. Travellers find a bed and a meal. Locals trade gossip over tankards of cider and rum. Letters and newspapers arrive and get read aloud, and arguments about taxes and liberty grow louder by the hour. It's warm, crowded, smoky, and alive in a way most homes aren't. Business deals get made, marriages get arranged, and more than a few revolutionary ideas get their first airing here. If you want to know what's happening in 1776, you don't read a feed. You go to the tavern. Let's appreciate how many roles this one establishment plays, because it's the closest thing the community has to a town centre. For travellers, the tavern, sometimes called an ordinary, is an inn, offering a meal, a drink, and a bed, the latter quite possibly shared with a stranger. For locals, it's the gathering place, the spot to escape the isolation of farm and household, and be among other people. It's where you eat and drink in company, warm yourself by a good fire, and feel the pulse of the wider world. In a society where most homes are cramped and quiet, the tavern's noise and warmth are a genuine draw. It's also the information hub, the place where news lives and circulates. Newspapers arrive and are read aloud to the assembled drinkers, letters and post pass through, and travellers bring word from distant towns and across the sea. Around the tables, news is discussed, debated, embellished, and spread, so that the tavern functions as a kind of communal broadcast centre long before any such thing existed. If something important has happened, the tavern is where you'll hear about it, and where you'll argue about what it means. Business and civic life flow through the tavern too. Deals are struck and contracts discussed over drinks, auctions and sales are held, and the tavern often hosts official functions, from court sessions to town meetings, when no other suitable space exists. Militia companies muster nearby and gather inside. Travellers and locals alike conduct the practical business of life within its walls. It's not merely a place of leisure. It's woven into the working, governing and connecting machinery of the community. The social life of the tavern is rich and varied, drawing a cross-section of the community together. Farmers, tradesmen, merchants and travellers mingle, sharing drink, conversation, games and song. There's cider, beer, rum and punch flowing freely, and the atmosphere can range from convivial to rowdy as the evening wears on and the tankards empty. It's a place of camaraderie and connection, of stories told and retold, of the easy sociability that's hard to find elsewhere in a dispersed, hard-working society. For many, it's the brightest spot in a demanding week, and crucially in this charged moment in history, the tavern is where politics catches fire. As tensions with Britain mount, taverns become hotbeds of political talk, organisation and resistance. The gathering places where grievances are aired, ideas are shared, and movements take shape. Fiery essays are read aloud and debated, plans are laid, and the language of liberty and defiance grows bolder with each passing night. The very sociability and openness of the tavern make it the natural cradle for the political ferment now sweeping the colonies. Revolutions, it turns out, are often discussed over drinks, so you pull up a stool, order a tankard, and join the warm, loud, smoky heart of community life, where news, business, friendship, and rebellion all flow together. The tavern is where colonial America comes alive. But not every gathering is so lively, because one day a week, the whole community assembles for something far more solemn and considerably longer as will endure next. Let's observe the Sabbath and settle in, because in many colonies it dominates the entire day. Sunday means church, and church means hours, long demanding sermons delivered in unheated meeting houses where you sit on hard wooden benches and are absolutely expected to stay awake. In strict communities, an official keeps watch for drowsy or fidgeting congregants and corrects them on the spot. Work is forbidden, travel is discouraged, and frivolity is frowned upon. Religion isn't a once-a-week appointment here. It shapes laws, schedules, morality, and the rhythm of the whole community. For many colonists, faith offers real comfort and meaning in a hard life. It also offers a very, very long morning. Let's begin with how completely the Sabbath dominates the day, particularly in the more devout regions. Sunday is set apart entirely for worship and rest here means rest from labour and amusement alike, not leisure as we'd understand it. Ordinary work is set aside. Shops and fields are quiet, and the day revolves around attending church. In stricter communities, even unnecessary travel, play, and idle activity are discouraged or outright forbidden. So the day takes on a hushed, solemn character quite unlike the rest of the week. The whole community moves to the rhythm of worship. The centerpiece is the church service, and it is an endurance event. Sermons stretch on for an hour or two, sometimes longer, delivered with great seriousness and theological weight, and a single Sunday might include more than one lengthy service with a break in between. The congregation sits on hard wooden benches or pews in a meeting house that, in winter, is bitterly cold and unheated, since heating such a building was impractical and, to some, an unwelcome comfort. Worshippers bundle up, bring footstoves with hot coals, and steel themselves for a long, demanding stretch of attentive sitting. Staying awake and attentive through all this is itself an expectation, and in some communities, enforced. An official, sometimes called a tithing man, patrols the aisles during the service, keeping order, quieting restless children, and rousing anyone who nods off, occasionally with a long pole tipped to gently or not so gently wake the drowsy. Fidgeting, whispering, and inattention are frowned upon, and the watchful presence of this enforcer adds a note of discipline to the worship. Falling asleep during the sermon is not merely embarrassing, it can earn you a public correction. Where you sit in the meeting house often reflects your place in the community, another way the social order is reinforced. Seating is frequently assigned according to status, wealth, age, and standing, so the arrangement of bodies in the pews quietly maps the hierarchy of the town. Men and women may be seated separately, and families know their place in the structure. Even in worship, the community's careful sense of rank and order is on display, woven into the very furniture. Beyond the long Sundays, religion saturates daily life and shapes the law itself. Faith informs morality, governs behavior, and underpins the rules of the community, with so-called blue laws restricting what may be done on the Sabbath, and authorities concerned with enforcing piety and proper conduct. For many colonists, this religious framework isn't experienced as oppression, but as the meaningful structure of life, offering comfort, hope, purpose, and a shared moral universe in a world full of hardship and uncertainty. Faith helps people bear losses and dangers that would otherwise be unbearable. So you put on your finest, file into the cold meeting house, take your assigned seat, and settle in for the long, solemn, pole-patrolled hours of the Sabbath, finding in it both duty and, for many, genuine solace. It's the longest day of the week, and, to many, the most important. But not everyone in this society shares equally in its rhythms or its freedoms, and we turn now to those bound by contract, whose years were not entirely their own. Let's look at a large and often overlooked part of colonial society: indentured servants. Many people arrive in America unable to afford the costly voyage, so they sign contracts trading several years of labour for their passage, room and board. For the length of the term, often 4 to 7 years, they're bound to a master, with limited freedom and hard work expected daily. Some complete their service and go on to build independent lives. Others suffer harsh treatment with little recourse. The system supplies much of the labour in the colonies and shapes countless lives. It's a stark reminder that for a great many ordinary people, freedom in 1776 is something earned slowly, year by labouring year. Let's understand the bargain at the heart of indenture, because it's a transaction born of desperation and opportunity. The voyage across the Atlantic is expensive, far beyond the means of many who long to come to the colonies in search of a better life. So they strike a deal. In exchange for their passage and their keep once they arrive, they bind themselves to work for a master for a set number of years. The contract, the indenture itself, spells out the terms, and once signed, it transfers a person's labour and much of their freedom to whoever holds it. They arrive owing not money but time. The terms of that service are demanding, and the servant's life during it is sharply constrained. For the length of the contract, the indentured servant works for the master at whatever labour is required, in the fields, the workshop, or the household, receiving food, lodging, and clothing, but no wages. Their freedom is limited. They can't simply leave, marry without permission, or come and go as they please, and the master holds considerable authority over their daily life. Running away is treated as a serious offence, and captured runaways could have time added to their term. For these years, their lives are not fully their own. The experience varies enormously depending on the master and the circumstances. Some servants are treated with reasonable fairness, fed and housed adequately, and worked hard but not cruelly, completing their terms intact and ready to begin again. Others fall under harsh exploitative masters who overwork, underfeed, or mistreat them, and the servant has limited recourse against abuse, dependent on a legal system that doesn't always protect them. The quality of those bound years could mean the difference between a difficult apprenticeship in colonial life and genuine suffering. The system is also vast in scale, supplying a great deal of the labour that built and sustained the colonies. A substantial share of the people arriving from Europe come as indentured servants, making the institution a major engine of immigration and labour. Beyond voluntary servants, others arrive under more coercive arrangements, including convicts transported to serve out terms of labour, and redemptioners who arrange to pay their passage after arrival. The colonial workforce, in other words, includes a large population working under various forms of bound, unfree labour, a reality central to the era's economy. What happens at the end of the term matters greatly, and here the system holds out genuine promise for some. A servant who completes their indenture is freed from the contract and in many cases owed what were called freedom dues, perhaps some goods, tools, clothing, or occasionally land to help them start an independent life. For those who survive their term and are treated fairly, indenture can be a real if grueling path to establishing themselves in the colonies, becoming free labourers, tenants, or even property owners in time. The years of bondage, for some, are a difficult bridge to opportunity, so the indentured servant labours through their contracted years, freedom held just over the horizon, earning by hard work the independence others were born with. It's a path defined by patience, endurance, and the slow repayment of a debt measured in time. But there is another, far graver and more brutal reality of unfreedom in this society, one we must speak of plainly and with the seriousness it demands. We come now to the hardest and most important part of this story, and it deserves to be told plainly. In 1776, slavery exists throughout the colonies, and enslaved people make up a significant portion of the population, with the greatest numbers in the South. They are denied freedom, family security, education, and the most basic human rights. Forced into grueling labour on farms and plantations and in households, while the society around them debates liberty and language that does not extend to them. Their endurance, their skill, their communities and their resistance are a profound and essential part of this history. As we picture daily life in this era, we hold this reality with honesty and with respect for those who lived it. The scope of slavery in this period is vast, reaching into every region of the colonies. Enslaved people of African descent number in the hundreds of thousands and make up a large share of the total population, with the heaviest concentrations in the southern colonies, where their forced labour underpins the cultivation of crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo. But slavery is not confined to the south. Enslaved people are held in the northern and middle colonies as well, working in households, on farms, in trades, and in ports. The institution is woven through the entire fabric of colonial society and its economy. The conditions of enslavement are brutal, and the denial of basic humanity is total. Enslaved people are treated as property, bought and sold, their labour taken without compensation, and their freedom withheld entirely. They are forced to work long, grueling hours under harsh conditions, subject to the will and the violence of those who claim to own them. They are denied education, denied legal protections afforded to others, and denied control over their own bodies and lives. Families face the constant agonizing threat of being separated by sale, with parents, children, and spouses torn apart at an owner's decision. It is a system of profound cruelty and injustice. Yet within these terrible circumstances, enslaved people preserve their humanity, their dignity, and their bonds with extraordinary strength. They built families and communities, sustained cultural and spiritual traditions, and passed knowledge, skill, and memory across generations despite every effort to strip these from them. Their labour and expertise were essential to the colonies in countless trades and tasks, and their cultural contributions ran deep. In the face of dehumanization, they held fast to their identities, their relationships, and their hope, an endurance that stands as a testament to the human spirit under unimaginable pressure. Resistance, too, took many forms, from the quiet to the open. Enslaved people resisted their bondage through daily acts of defiance, through preserving forbidden practices, through escape, and at times through organized revolt, always at enormous personal risk. They sought freedom by every means available to them, and their struggle for liberty was real and continuous, even when the larger society refused to acknowledge it. This long history of resistance is an inseparable part of the story of the era, and here lies the searing contradiction at the heart of this moment. As the colonies move toward revolution, proclaiming ringing ideals of liberty, equality, and the rights of all people, those very ideals are denied to the enslaved men, women, and children living among them. The language of freedom fills the air even as a vast population is held in bondage, a profound hypocrisy that some of the era recognized and that would shape the nation's struggles for generations to come. To tell the truth of daily life in 1776 is to hold this contradiction honestly and unflinchingly. So we remember the enslaved people of this era with seriousness and respect, honouring their suffering, their resilience, their humanity, and their unending pursuit of the freedom they were so wrongly denied. Their story is central to this history and must never be set aside, and it is against this complex, contradictory backdrop of liberty proclaimed and liberty denied that the great upheaval of the age now arrives, as the colonies stand on the very edge of revolution. Finally, let's step outside and feel the tension, because 1776 is not an ordinary year. Something is shifting. In the taverns and town squares, the talk of taxes, rights, and representation has hardened into talk of independence. Militias drill on village greens, ordinary farmers and tradesmen practicing with muskets. Pamphlets pass hand to hand, newspapers print bold and dangerous words, and the distant authority of a king across the ocean suddenly feels intolerable. The daily grind of mush and mud and labour continues, but underneath it runs a current of fear and hope and enormous consequence. The people living this exhausting, itchy, candlelit life don't yet know how the story ends. They only know the world is about to change forever. Let's understand the mood, because it has been building for years toward this moment. Long simmering grievances over taxes imposed without the colonists' consent, over their lack of a voice in the government that ruled them, over a series of laws and crackdowns that felt like punishment, have hardened resentment into something far more dangerous. What began as protests, petitions, and boycotts has curdled into open defiance. The famous destruction of tea in Boston Harbor, the harsh response that followed, and the gathering of representatives to coordinate resistance have all pushed the colonies steadily toward a confrontation that once seemed unthinkable. By this year, the talk is no longer of reconciliation but of separation. The fighting, in fact, has already begun. The first shots between colonial militia and British troops have been fired in the countryside, and ordinary men have taken up arms against the most powerful empire in the world. Armies are forming, a continental force is taking shape under a commanding general, and the conflict is spreading from a local crisis into a full war. The abstract arguments of the previous decade have become a matter of muskets, blood and survival, and there is a growing, sobering awareness that there may be no turning back. Ideas are driving all of this, and they're spreading like fire through the dry brush of discontent. Powerful pamphlets and essays written in plain, stirring language make the case for independence and put into words what many have only dared to feel, and they pass from hand to hand and are read aloud to crowds. The bold assertion that people have natural rights, that government must rest on the consent of the governed, that it is not only permissible but right to throw off a tyrannical rule, electrifies the colonies. This year sees a formal declaration of independence, a momentous break that transforms rebellious colonists into citizens of a new and untested nation. For ordinary people, all of this lands squarely in the middle of their hard, demanding daily lives. The farmer still rises before dawn, the woman still tends the endless work of the household, the tradesman still labours at his craft. But now these familiar routines unfold against a backdrop of war and revolution. Men leave their farms and shops to serve in the militia or the army. Families face shortages, disruption, and danger, and communities are divided between those who support the cause, those loyal to the crown, and those who simply want to be left in peace. The great events of history are not happening somewhere far away. They're reaching right into the home, the field, and the tavern, and no one living through it knows how it will end. They cannot see the outcome we now take for granted. They face only uncertainty, risk, and the enormous stakes of a struggle whose result is anything but assured. They press on through their exhausting, uncomfortable, candlelit lives, carrying not only the daily burdens we've explored, but the weight of a world remaking itself around them. Their courage, their endurance, and their choices in this pivotal year would shape everything that came after. So they stand at the edge of something vast, ordinary people in an extraordinary time, living each demanding day while history gathers itself to turn. The mush is still beige, the bed is still lumpy, the winter is still cruel, and yet everything is about to be different. And as we leave them there, on the threshold of a new nation, it's worth taking a quiet moment to reflect on all they endured and on how far we've come. So there it is, a single day in America 250 years ago, and somehow you survived it. You woke on a lumpy sack of straw with your whole family piled around you, emptied a chamber pot before sunrise, choked down a bowl of beige mush, pinned yourself into clothes you'd wear for a week, and brushed your teeth with a frayed twig and pure optimism. You hauled water, worked the fields until your back filed a formal complaint, drank cider for breakfast because the water might kill you, dodged lice and bedbugs and a doctor armed with leeches, and finally crawled back into the dark by the light of a single precious candle. It was cold, it was itchy, it was relentless, and tomorrow it would happen all over again. But here's the thing worth remembering as you drift off. The people who lived this life weren't just enduring it, they were building something. Farmers, mothers, tradesmen, servants, and the enslaved men and women whose forced labour and quiet resilience are woven inseparably into this story. They worked, they suffered, they laughed, they hoped, and they passed their stubborn endurance down through the generations until it reached you. They lived through hardship we can barely imagine, in a year when the whole world was about to change, and they kept going anyway, one beige breakfast and one freezing morning at a time. So tonight, as you sink into your soft mattress with clean sheets, hot water down the hall, and a thermostat that asks nothing of you, take just a quiet moment of gratitude for the countless ordinary people who came before. They endured so much so that we could rest so easily. Sleep well, you've more than earned it. Good night.